What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you 30 competitive cards that you can buy for under $5. Now, I almost had a fucking heart attack earlier today because if you were paying any attention to the website for the Forbidden and Limited list, it actually went down, and a lot of us thought that that meant they were updating the list. Turns out it just happened to be website maintenance, unfortunately, but it just goes to show that we could be getting that Forbidden and Limited list at any moment. So I wanted to bring you guys this video so you have some really good options that are very affordable at the moment, and when we do inevitably get that new ban list, these cards might not remain cheap for very long. So I wanted to give you guys some recommendations that if you have some cash available, you can pick up some very strong cards moving into the next format. But before we get into it, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest YouTube channel members as always. So big shout out today to CyberSeb and Roberto. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support me in the channel through a YouTube channel membership, hit the join button down below or check out the links in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. I'm going to start with probably some of the most relevant, at least from a competitive standpoint, cards, and that's going to be hand traps. There's actually quite a handful of hand traps that you can acquire for around the $5 or less price range. Starting off with Effect Veiler. Effect Veiler is one of those hand traps that kind of moves in and out of different formats, and it's one of those cards that it's pretty good. One advantage Effect Veiler has over all these other cards is that you can use it multiple times in a turn, and you know, yeah, it targets, and yeah, you can only use it in specific instances, but honestly, it's still a really good card. We've also got a card like PSY-FRAMEGEAR Gamma. Now, Gamma is kind of like the better version of Effect Veiler, a little bit more expensive, and you do have to run PSY-FRAME Driver, but the advantage here is that you don't target, you can destroy the card that you're using, and it can also stop other hand traps, so it's just such an incredibly powerful card. Not a lot of cards can really play around Gamma very well, and it's something that a lot of people are using, especially now in the competitive format, to combat some of the best decks. So just something to keep in mind. Another good hand trap is Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. I guess a little bit of a caveat here is that when it comes to Winter Cherries, you do have to have the extra deck monsters you're trying to hit out of your opponent's extra deck, so I guess it's a little bit more than $5 a copy, but if you're able to maybe borrow it from your friends, or if you even own the card that you're trying to hit out of your opponent's extra deck, Ghost Reaper can be absolutely crucial and can honestly win you a lot of matchups if you open it in your 5-card hand. So something you might want to consider if you haven't picked it up already. This card tends to fluctuate a lot and is definitely a worthwhile investment. Another set of cards I wanted to discuss are not exactly hand traps, but kind of like fall into that category, and that's Kaijus. Kaijus are actually rather affordable in the $5 price range. I don't think you can get maybe Gamma Seals at that price, but you can pretty much get every other Kaiju that's pretty much available for $5 or less. So depending on the type of deck that you're playing, you might be able to settle with something like Humongous, which is only a little bit higher in terms of attack value compared to Gamma Seal, but there are some advantages to playing the other Kaijus depending on what type of deck you're playing. So something you might just want to research, but keep in mind the Kaijus are a very good way to out a lot of problematic boards, can out, just floodgate monsters, it can just out a lot of really good things, and really something you want to have in your binder when you need them. Now we're going to move on to some other monsters, and these are actually some very good stun cards that not only can be used in their own deck, but also just make for incredibly powerful side deck cards depending on how a format shapes up. Inspector Border, coming out of the 2018 Megatins, actually has a very low price point at the moment at about $5, and again, this can be one of those side deck cards that if you just summon it turn 1, you could honestly just win a game just with that card alone. So definitely something worth picking up while the price is low. There's also Thunder King Ryo, again another stun card that is just incredibly powerful depending on the type of deck you're playing it against. There's a lot of meta strategies that revolve around searching, and Thunder King has a 1900 body, it can negate inherent special summons. It's a really solid card and very affordable, something you might want to have a playset of. And then finally, Denko Sekka, kind of hitting the back row here. We still do have a lot of back row decks running around. You got Paleozoic, you got Draco, Yu-Gi-Oh, you have Altergeist. These decks are still very prevalent, but having a Denko Sekka at your disposal for only about $2 to $3 is a really nice, worthwhile investment to kind of give you that insurance policy going up against those back row decks. Another card that's kind of in the stun category, but it's more reactive compared to proactive, is Artifact Scythe. Now, obviously, this goes in tandem with Artifact Sanctum, which I did in my 50 cards for under $1 video, which you can check out here. But since Sanctum is so cheap, I figured Scythe has to go on this list. Locking your opponent out of the extra deck for the entire turn is insane, and a lot of people have actually started citing the artifacts recently for that reason, just because that effect is so powerful and very difficult to stop. You only really need one copy of Scythe to go with your playset of Sanctum, so you're really only going to be paying about $5 all in for that little engine, and it's definitely going to pay off in dividends in the long run. Now we're going to move on to some extra deck monsters you might want to pick up. First and foremost, Topologic Bomber Dragon, sitting at about $4 to $5. This is a very good link for the ability to just like continuously Raigeki the field is incredibly powerful, especially with those pesky scapegoats. Nice little one of to have and not too expensive. You've also got Link Kuriboh. Link Kuriboh is definitely something that if you don't already have it, you should pick up. You can get this, just as a standalone for about $4 to $5, or just get the starter deck that it came in. Personally, I think you should just go with the Link Kuriboh because there's not really a lot of value in that starter deck as a whole, but Link Kuriboh is one of the best Link 1 monsters in the game, and definitely something you're going to want to have because later on, it's just going to become more and more absurd. Tornado Dragon's also a nice card that I think you should pick up. Yeah, it's an Xyz monster and it's kind of restricted to level 4 base decks, but it's kind of like one of the best rank 4s in the game. It has a quick effect spell and trap removal. I mean, who doesn't love that? It's just such a powerful card, and I feel like just having one copy of it at your disposal if you might need it might come in handy. And lastly, we have Chimera Tech Mega Fleet Dragon. This is sitting at about $4 to $5, but makes a very decent option for the side deck if you can get your hands on some Cyber Dragons, because this can break extra links, this can just stop monsters that are in the extra monster zone just with an inherent normal summon. The fact that it doesn't use an effect to attempt to break something like an extra link is actually very powerful, and not a lot of decks are able to stop that. So, in tandem with having to throw in some Cyber Dragons in either your main or side deck, probably the side deck, it's a really nice card to have, and not exactly too expensive considering you really only need one. Next, we're going to talk about some spell cards, and the number one spell card you should probably have from this entire list is Twin Twister. Twin Twister's had multiple reprints now, and it's only about a $3 card, but this is probably the best spell and trap removal in the entire game. It ends up being a 2 for 2, but if you can get some value off of the card you discard, then it's going to basically just be advantage for you, hitting so many of your opponent's back row, especially Floodgates, going up against those pesky back row decks. You definitely want to have your playset of Twin Twisters if you don't already. Alternatively, if you already have Twin Twister, consider picking up some Cosmic Cyclones. It may not be a 2 for 2, but the fact that you can banish the card that you're targeting with the Cosmic Cyclone actually has a lot of value depending on the matchup that you're playing against. You can banish those pesky Paleozoics, you can banish cards like the True Draco card so that they don't trigger. There's a lot of really cool interactions with Cosmic Cyclone that it's a very close second to Twin Twister, but the value of being able to destroy 2 cards does outweigh the fact you're only destroying 1, and Cosmic Cyclone does have a life point cost as well, so something to also consider. Shared Ride is also a relatively cheap card. This was one of the most played cards of the previous format just because there was so much searching, and it was kind of like a pseudo Max C except in quick play spell form. It really put fear in a lot of players because they didn't want to give their opponent a ton of advantage, and I'm surprised this card is as cheap as it is, so I would definitely get a playset before it spikes back up because that can very well happen. And then also Pot of Desires is still a $3 to $4 card since it was printed in last year's Megatins. I would really get your playset if you don't have it already. There's going to be so many different decks that Pot of Desires is viable in that it's really just good to have a generic +1 that you can realistically play in a lot of different strategies. Another really good spell card to consider is Brilliant Fusion. Now, I know we have Nightmare Goblin, but frankly, Nightmare Goblin might not survive the upcoming ban list. Brilliant Fusion is just kind of like a nice alternative. It's what we used before, and bestowing a deck with an extra normal summon is just really good, and this card is very affordable powerful, and if someone finds a way to break it, it doesn't have many printings, and the price might shoot up tremendously. There's also Ties of the Brethren. This is a very specific card, usually used in stun decks, but it's still very powerful in what it's able to do. There's only been 2 printings of this card, and there are some applications for it, and it only takes 1 or 2 cards to be able to just realistically break something this powerful, so I definitely get a playset of these if you can. We also got a couple more cards out of the Mega Tin, such as Dragonic Diagram. Although this is meant for Draco, you can use this in so many other decks just because the destruction effect can prove to be so powerful, and so since Diagram is so cheap now, you definitely want to get your playset if you haven't already. And lastly, for the spells, we have Hey TRUNADEI. Now, this card actually started seeing side deck play last format, and it's actually really good. I mean, forcing your opponent to use their back row or flipping them up so that you actually know what you're going up against. You have the fact that you can use this to just OTK your opponent because now you know you don't have to play through any of their back row. It's just a very solid side deck card at best, and it comes up in very frequent scenarios. So, you know, this is a card that, again, has only had 1 other printing outside of the Mega Tin, so getting them cheap while you can might be very beneficial for both you and your wallet. Last but not least, though, we have the trap cards, and there's a lot of them here, starting off with Dimensional Barrier. This is a card that I feel is heavily underpriced, and at any moment, if we go back to a day where, you know, a fusion archetype or an Xyz archetype or a synchro archetype makes headway into the meta, you're definitely going to want Dimensional Barrier. I mean, Thunder Dragons are right on the horizon in Soul Fusion, and Dimensional Barrier started to see play in the OCG just because they're a fusion-based archetype. So again, this is a card that can spike very easily depending on how the format shifts. Another set of cards you definitely should have, if you don't already, is your Solemn Brigade. You should have 3 Solemn Strikes, a Solemn Warning, and even a playset of Solemn Scoldings as well. These are some of the best generic trap cards in the game just because they can hit so many different types of cards, and they're so powerful. I mean, there's a reason Solemn Warning is limited to 1, and Solemn Strike is honestly still an incredibly powerful card for what it is. Solemn Scolding can hit a lot more, but it can only be, you know, the only set card in your back row, so it's a little bit more restrictive, but just having these, you know, either as a side deck option or a main deck staple are incredibly potent. And speaking of potent, 2 other cards you definitely want to pick up before they keep going up in price are Rivalry of Warlords and Goes and Match. These are 2 of the most played floodgates in the current format, and the reason for that is not only are they incredibly powerful in helping stun decks, but they can also break extra links. These cards don't target, they don't destroy, they send to the graveyard, so if you can bait out your opponent's Tri-Gate Wizard, they have to get rid of their entire field because none of these cards are going to match up, and it's just such a powerful control tool. These cards have only had 2 printings each, I believe, and they're only going to keep going up in price until they see a reprint. These cards being only $3 a piece is a steal for how powerful these cards truly are. Another floodgate you might want to consider investing in is Anti-Spell Fragrance. Now, this card tends to spike up if we see a huge surge in spell cards being relevant in the format, and spell cards are one of the most played cards in the game, so this card's always going to have its place, but as long as stuff, you know, like Sky Strikers is going to be around, I think Anti-Spell is always going to be a safe investment. Another really good investment might be Mistake. Mistake is a very good floodgate because a lot of the best decks tend to search a lot of cards. Now, there are exceptions to that, like Altergeist, but for the most part, since, you know, these decks have a lot of consistency, Mistake is a good way to cripple them, and if you plan on playing a stun variant of any kind, or you really just want to slow your opponent down, Mistake is going to be the card for you. Another really powerful card is Typhoon. This is really good because it can out various different cards. It's a spell and trap removal, but it's not a spell, so it doesn't lose to Anti-Spell Fragrance. There's a lot of flexibility in a card like this, and it can actually out a lot of various things, and a lot of people have been gravitating towards a card like this for their side deck, so the fact you can pick these up for about $2 to $3 each at the moment is definitely worthwhile. And last but not least, wrapping up this video is Storming Mirror. Mirror Force. Now, I know battle tricks are a little bit archaic, but what's interesting about Storming Mirror Force is that it can actually out an extra link. If you're able to bait out your opponent's Tri-Gate Wizard, Storming Mirror Force will send all their cards back to the extra deck, and since that's not a destructive effect or a targeting effect, you know, it's actually a really cool way that you can out your opponent's extra link, and just the value of having a card like that there, Storming Mirror Force is always going to have a special place in the format, and you might be able to steal some wins with it if you're feeling cheeky. But guys, those are just my thoughts. I really hope you enjoyed this list of cards that you should pick up now before they go up in price. Let me know down in the comments if there's any other ones that I missed. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.